Welcome to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to helping you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most.
Well, hello and welcome to the Money and Meaning Show. I'm so happy you decided to spend some time with me today. I am really excited, as usual, about our guest today. You know, it's a important topic and one that I think you're going to enjoy. I've had Daniel Crosby on the show 2 or 3 times before, so he's a repeat guest. I really want to appreciate you being on again, Daniel, but let me give him a proper introduction because he's been pretty busy, as you'll find out. So Daniel is a New York Times bestselling author, and he's the Chief Behavioral Officer of Orion, a wealth management technology platform that many in the fee-only wealth management space engage with. He's written some great books. His first one was called Personal Benchmark, Integrating Behavioral Finance and Investment Management. And he actually was on the New York Times. He was a New York Times bestseller with that book. His second book, The Laws of Wealth, Psychology and the Secret to Investing Success, was published, and it was recognized in 2017 by the Axiom Business Book Awards as the best investment book of the year. So pretty cool, and it's actually been translated into 12 languages. His third book, and actually my favorite, was The Behavioral Investor, which, again, published in 2019 and was the best investment book of 2019. So we've got a trend going here, Daniel. His latest book that was just released this month in October of 2024 is called The Soul of Wealth. And I've been enjoying it, and we're going to talk about it today. The only real thing I'm going to say about his bio is he's earned a bachelor's degree and a PhD from Brigham Young University. He appears on a lot of podcasts and does a lot of writing and a lot of expertise in the science of behavioral investing, I guess I will say. How do we be better investors and better with our money as it relates to psychology and money and how all that intersects. So, Daniel, thanks for being here again.
Jeff, my pleasure. I wrote a book about money and meaning for the Money and Meaning Show.
That's right. And you've really hit it out of the ballpark with this book. As I mentioned when I reached out to you, I really love the format. It's a little different than your past books, the format. But before we get into the book, I just have to ask you. So the audience are, again, individual investors and people who are concerned about how to go live a fulfilling second half of life and how to get their financial plans in alignment with what matters so they can go live a meaningful second act, if you will, is sort of the analogy that I use. But tell me what a chief behavioral officer does at a large technology provider.
Yeah, sure, Jeff. With some of the most, I know you understand this deeply, but some of the most consequential determinants of whether or not someone reaches their financial goals is sort of the human side of thing. Do they fall prey to sort of predictable biases and mistakes that people make? Do they feel understood by their advisor? Does their advisor know to coach them up? Can we build technology that can help people actually make better decisions and streamline those cognitive processes? That's what I'm all about, is sort of removing obstacles from investors' way and helping advisors be the best that they can be when working with the human side of advice.
Gotcha. So your role is really to inspire and coach and teach advisors on how to use this expertise in helping their clients do a better job, or helping them do a better job for their clients on the behavioral side.
That's right. It's about 50% that. It's about 50% advisor education and partnership, and about 50% like actually building technology to help clients and advisors come together, make better decisions about risk, conceptualize and frame their investments in a way that optimizes their decision making. So yeah, it's fun. All things mind and money, and money and meaning.
Yeah. Well, and in addition to that role, you're writing books. So and adding obviously educating the public on these concepts as well. So let's dig into the book. The name of the book is The Soul of Wealth. And as I mentioned previously, I love the book. I love the formats of the short chapters, and so it's really helpful because you can read a chapter in just a matter of 10 or 15 minutes, and then have time to really think about it. But anyway, what inspired you to write The Soul of Wealth, and how would you say it's different than your previous books?
It's very different than my previous books. I mean, my previous books were by and large not written for a general audience. I mean, they were both sort of written for an advisor-facing audience. The Soul of Wealth is for everybody. The Soul of Wealth is for mom and pop investors as well as investment professionals like yourself. And then, the format is different. Jeff, this is a little bit of inside baseball, but I knew I wanted to write a book about money and meaning because you and I, share that vision. I'm on a bit of a soapbox about, this being the wealthiest civilization that's ever been. I mean, the U.S. in the 21st century, there's more ease and comfort and prosperity now than at any point in human history, and yet we're profoundly lonely, isolated, disconnected, depressed. And both of those things are true. So how is it that we have so much abundance and so much sort of spiritual and psychological emptiness? And I wanted to kind of build a bridge that would hopefully connect those two worlds of money and meaning. So I knew I wanted to do that because that's just, a passion that you and I share. But the format came to me late. I started to write this as a traditional, 10 or 12 chapters, 20 to 25 pages a piece. And I got about 80 pages in, and it just candidly wasn't good. It just wasn't up to my standards. I got in and it just felt kind of uninspired, and I scrapped it, which was really hard to do when you've put that much time into it. But about that time, I was reading a book by Rick Rubin, who is a music producer, right, for Jay-Z and the Beastie Boys and Johnny Cash and all these folks. And he has a book called The Creative Act, which is
I read it.
Yeah, it's great, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's formatted similarly. His are even shorter. They're like a page or two, and there's, a zillion chapters. And so I said, hey, this is really neat. And I almost wrote it like a devotional kind of, to the point where you could, a lot of people are treating it like that. There's 50 chapters, there's 52 weeks in a year. You go on vacation for a couple weeks. Basically one chapter per working week of the year for you to kind of get your head right with your money. So it's been a gift to see how people are using this new format. And I'm really glad we landed on that.
Yeah, I love it. I really do. Because again, you wrote something in the book that I liked about how your goal was not to be a page turner. And I tried to do something similar to that in my book, because it's the kind of book where you really do have to think about the concepts a little bit to really get the most out of them, even though they're short chapters. They're not long. And what I also like is it seems like in every chapter that I've read so far, you're always using a story, which makes it a lot more interesting for one and fun to read. But there are also some really, really important points. How would you define soulful wealth? Or how do you argue that the true wealth is more than money? Tell me a little bit about the concept of how you're defining soulful wealth, or the importance of wealth being more than just finances.
Yeah. So, when we talk about wealth colloquially, right? When we talk about wealth, especially in our industry, Jeff, it's usually focused on money, like the absence or the presence of money. But from a psychological perspective, when you talk about a life well lived and sort of a fulsome life, a wealthy life, the literature would suggest it includes things in addition to that. It would include things like appropriate leisure, appropriate work. Do you have a hobby or a job that is sort of all encompassing and positive for you? It would be first and foremost the quality of your relationships. Are you giving love? Are you receiving love? It would be meaning. which is, a commitment to God or a personal philosophy or charity or something bigger than yourself. And then finally, it would be advancement. Are you growing? Are you changing? Are you growing? Are you learning? Humankind is a growth-oriented species. And so when you think about from a psychological perspective, what makes life living, it's these five things. And really, financial wealth can help you have a good time. Like it's very directly one for one for that, right? Like if you have a lot of money, yeah, like taking a cruise, going on a trip, eating an ice cream cone, going to a sporting event. These are all like fun that money can buy. But when you think about relationships and meaning and growth and struggle and work, these are only sort of tangentially related to money. And we have to be thoughtful about how we use the wealth, the financial wealth that we have to create a life that's holistically wealthy.
Gotcha. So much broader than just the financial wealth that we think about oftentimes in the financial services industry.
Yeah.
You mentioned something there about work. And how does work relate to some of this? You've written a good bit in the book about how work can be meaningful and wealth related to work. What are your thoughts on that? And how did you expand on the role that work can play in our soulful wealth?
It's a little tricky, Jeff, and that's why I think people get it wrong. So on the one hand, we know that we need work and we need effort. And you actually see in the data that deaths spike around people's formal retirement from work, because work provides us with so much structure. Think about all the things that I talked about. You've got friends and relationships at work. Like you're working on something meaningful as part of a bigger team. You have opportunities for advancement. Like so many of the things that make life good, can be met at work. And yet at the same time, we can kind of simultaneously over-focus and under-focus on work. Because, I also talk in the book about the 5 regrets of the dying, like things that people regret when they're on that deathbed, and what really matters and what really doesn't is made crystal clear in life. The only way that work comes up is people say, I wish I hadn't worked so much. So I think it's more about finding the right kind of work. I think people, when people think about their work, they tend to optimize for dollars. And I think maybe we're optimizing for the wrong thing, because we need work, but we need to optimize for things like impact and growth and, personal edification, and not simply dollars. Because right now we're sort of simultaneously trying to get away from work and ignoring the positive benefits of it by optimizing only for a paycheck.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a paradox, right? So the regrets of the dying were, I wish I didn't work so much, but then with all the positive attributes that work can give us psychologically, that's kind of a trade-off. I guess it gets back to, is the work meaningful to you? Is that kind of the big idea here? If it's meaningful to you, maybe it's not something you're trying to get out of. It does give you something besides just a paycheck.
That's exactly right. Warren Buffett talks about how he skips to work every day, which is probably not literally true now that he's in his 90s. But, this it's at least metaphorically true that, we should be looking for the kind of work where we can skip to work and then it doesn't feel like work. Most people are not in that position, though.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've liked about all of your books is how incredibly well-researched they are and footnoted. I mean, it's easy to go down rabbit trails if you want to see the real research that you drew from. Some of the research that I found most interesting was related to some of the happiness literature and maybe some of the more recent studies. We used to always think there was a dollar amount threshold where money can't buy you happiness. And I know we've all said that many, many times. Money won't make you happy. And you actually pulled out some research that sort of refutes that a little bit, depending on how you define happiness, I suppose. But can you talk a little bit about that later research? Are you familiar with the chapter I'm going back to here?
I am, yeah. So, there was this famous study from a few years back now by Nobel Prize winner Danny Kahneman, and he did this research. At the time, it was $75,000, which would be about $100,000 today.
Okay.
And he and Angus Deaton, who he did the research with, they found that happiness sort of plateaued at what would today be about $100,000.
Okay.
And that is largely an artifact of how they measured happiness, because one way to measure happiness is sort of the absence of misery, or just sort of an absence of pain or wants.
Yeah. You live in a warm house, you have food, you got health care, you got the basic needs met.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like someone who makes $100,000, all that stuff's in place. They're not hearing gunshots at night because they live in a nice neighborhood. Right. And so the way they would measure happiness was to page them, literally like page them on a pager a couple of times a day and just kind of like, how you doing? And they're like, good, I'm tummy's full, like, I'm warm, my kids are safe, like I'm good. And so that's true, right? Like money reliably buys the absence of misery. But then if we look at other ways of measuring happiness, another study asked people to just self-report sort of qualitatively, how are you doing? So if I just gave you a sheet of paper and said, hey, Jeff, how you doing, man? Like write down, how are you doing? What they found is that people's subjective sort of qualitative appraisals of their life basically got better and better the more money they made. And they measured this up to about $500,000 a year.
Okay.
And the more money people made, I mean, it's a straight line. Like the more money people made, the happier they were in their self-report. So you go, oh, well, maybe money can buy happiness. But then we got another study that shows that, about 15% of people aren't made happy by any amount of money. They're just reliably.
Could it be genetics?
Yeah. Well, genetics is about half of it. When you look at the happiness literature, you see that genetics is the biggest predictor of sort of happiness set points. People have happiness set points the way they have a set point for weight or something like that.
Right.
And genetics is the biggest thing. Second is sort of your choices, like your attitude and your volitional piece. And then the smallest contributor is actually your circumstances. So it's like 50% genetic, 40%, volitional choices, and 10% down to your circumstances. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. So these 15% of people, it's probably some mix of genetics and choices. And I mean, they don't need more money. They need therapy and coping strategies, right? I mean, they need they need other resources. So like what we take away from it, I have a whole piece in there too about how spending money on certain things makes you happier than others that we can talk about if you'd like. But, basically, money reliably buys the absence of misery. Up to some point, it probably buys some level of self-appraised happiness, unless you've got kind of bigger problems, and then you just got to work on those problems themselves and not try and scratch that itch with making more money.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's talk about the spending. You just kind of teed that up a little bit. What does the spending tell us about your values or how you obtain happiness through spending?
Yeah. So, because
we're in an industry that, discourages spending, unfortunately, even on things that are valuable to our clients sometimes. I mean, I think as our industry, we show the defer so you can have this great life later, as opposed to enjoying the journey today, which is, I think, sort of the opposite of what we should be teaching sometimes. So what's your take on the spending?
Yeah, there's a few ways the research shows that we can reliably spend money to buy happiness. One, unsurprisingly, is quality time with people we love.
Okay.
Two is novelty. So, going to a new place. Like if I went to Japan tomorrow, you know, new sights, new memories, new food, new friends. I mean, it's the kind of thing that gets better with age. Those memories get better with age. They get built up over time in your mind through retelling and reliving. You buy a watch or a car or a briefcase and it gets old. Like it kind of falls apart. The memories get better.
Right.
So novelty, relationships, time with people we love, getting out of things we hate reliably buys us happiness. Getting out of yard work or laundry or housework or something if you really dislike it, doing your taxes, right? Like I think people who pay to have their taxes done would say that's some of the best money they spend all year. So that's another big one. And then the last one that I'll talk about is kind of conditional, because, we found that if you buy a car, tends to be a small bump, right? You buy if Jeff goes out and buys
the satisfaction is fleeting.
Yeah, it's fleeting satisfaction. Unless, right, if Jeff goes out and buys a Ferrari, which he's totally prone to do, right?
Yeah, I got 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, the satisfaction will be fleeting unless Jeff buys the Ferrari to be part of the exotic car club of North Atlanta.
Gotcha.
And then you got buddies, right? Like you've got somewhere to go on a Saturday. You've got some friends. You can pop the hood and talk about your engines, and you can go on trips together. And, so if the thing is buying you entree into something higher, right? Like if the thing is buying you entree into something higher, like a club or a relational connection, a lot of times, it's money well spent.
Interesting. You have a chapter early in the book as well on generosity. What does the research say about giving and how giving plays on our sense of well-being and how it relates to soulful wealth?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite chapters. I wanted the soul of wealth to be evergreen. I wanted my kids' to be able to pick this up in 50 years and read it and have it still be true. And so one of the things that I did is I looked for points of agreement between great philosophical and wisdom and faith traditions. So if you look at this idea that giving money away will make your life richer, the Bible says it, the Bhagavad Gita says it, the Tao Te Ching, the Quran. I mean, just like on and on, every wisdom tradition throughout the ages has had some version of your life is made richer through giving of your substance. And that doesn't make sense sort of mathematically. But if you look at the research, the science actually backs up the religion. The science actually says, first of all, we see this tendency in children as young as 2. We see this children, in children as young as 2, they have this sort of warm glow of giving. But one condition has to be met, and it's an important condition. It's that it has to be effortful giving. Like it has to matter to them. Their parent can't just give them a second candy bar to give to their peer. They need to take the candy bar they've got and break it in half and share it with their peer.
Some level of sacrifice.
Yeah, there has to be some level of sacrifice, right? And that it's like in the Bible's full of if you lose your life, that's where you find it. And like all these great wisdom traditions have this, but it has to be sacrificial. It has to be effortful. It has to hurt a little bit. And so I think that's one of the unpopular takeaways from that chapter is like your philanthropy should make you think twice. Your philanthropy should be meaningful enough that it hurts a bit. And then, the second thing that I find so powerful, there's research in that chapter. When you ask people, are you wealthy? That is better than anyone by working your client work. That's a subjective thing, right? There are people who have more or less physical stuff or physical money. Some think they're wealthy, some don't, and it's not always very connected to the actual dollars in the bank. When you ask people, are you wealthy? There's two predictors of how they answer that question. One is the literal dollars in the bank, of course, right? Like, more numbers in the bank is associated with greater feelings of wealth. The second predictor, which is just as predictive, is how charitable they are.
Really?
And so what you see is there are people where if you looked at sort of a normal distribution bell curve of wealth, would not be high, would be below the 50th percentile for income or wealth, but they feel wealthy because they're generous. And so it's sort of a chicken and an egg thing, right? You can't wait till you feel wealthy to be generous. Sometimes you have to be generous to feel wealthy.
Interesting. Yeah, that's it. That's very, very interesting. I know you do a lot of this in your training, and with some of the technology tools that you're developing for Orion helps with things like good habits. So tell me the impact of willpower or effort in making healthy financial decisions. Where does that come into play? The ability of, kind of getting past the urge to spend or the urge not to save or the urge to trade. Where does psychology come into that?
In the book, I use the example of the two great explorers, right, on these Arctic expeditions, Scott and Amundsen.
Okay. Yeah.
And the worst funded of the two operations is the one that actually succeeded. And I use this as sort of a metaphor for talking about this idea of willpower, because both men wanted it, right? I mean, both men wanted to be the first to plant their flags at the pole. Like they both wanted this very badly. They were both gifted. They were both talented. They were both hardworking. They were both fit. So like, what is it that distinguishes the guy who got there first and, by the way, returned safely from the guy who got there second and everyone died on the way home?
Right.
So,
bad outcome.
Yeah, bad outcome times two, right? So it comes down to two things. It's not willpower. It's not your dreams or your goals, because everybody's got the same dreams, right? Dreams are cheap. Everybody wants to be rich. Everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants a happy family. Everybody wants six-pack abs. Like, I mean, just like that is the cheapest thing on earth. Everyone has that. The two things that differentiated folks, first were their habits, were their routines. And the second one, I think we mostly get that. The second one, which I think is more powerful, is staying out of harm's way, like not putting temptation in the way. If you are trying to be a long-term investor, right, you shouldn't watch cable financial news every night. You're putting yourself in harm's way.
Right. Yeah.
If
control
you
your
are,
environment. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you're trying to get in shape, you shouldn't keep Oreos in your house because they're delightful and you'll eat a whole sleeve, right? That one felt like projection, but this is this is something that people, we think of willpower as like kind of white knuckling your way past every temptation. It's not that. It's freeing yourself from temptation so that you don't have to white knuckle it. That's what the research shows.
Gotcha. Create the boundaries or whatever's necessary to make it easier to choose the choice that you really want to make but can't always make in the moment.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting about, you said everybody's got the goals, but don't you write that there is some research about tying saving to particular goals that can be more motivating? Did I read that wrong?
No, you read that right. But I think I would make a little bit of a distinction between, like a goal like I want to be rich and a deeply personal, deeply meaningful vision of the future.
I see.
A lot of what I talk about in that chapter is when you ask the average person, what are your financial goals? We tend to see kind of two basic things. A lot of round numbers, right? I want $1 million. I want $10 million or, whatever, $100 million, where these numbers are just kind of plucked from the sky.
Yeah.
Don't
really mean much. Yeah.
They don't mean much, right? Or they're highly mimetic. Like, my neighbor got a boat, so I want a boat. My brother-in-law got a second home, so now I want a second home. These things don't tick the box of my deeply meaningful personal goals. In the chapter on meaning, I have a couple of kind of chapters on meaning and purpose. You see that for people who have tightly aligned their financial plans with their unique vision of the good life, the results are incredible. They're less likely to panic. They're more likely to save. They have higher average balances. They have a better time along the way. But I also use the example of Michael Phelps in the book. Like, this is a guy who visualized every stroke before he would swim a race. And that's kind of what's required of us. We need a deeply personalized vision of the good life that then we make very vivid and we visualize it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in my years of financial planning, I mean, that's, I don't have a PhD in psychology, but it was obvious by having a financial plan, at least with specific goals. But I think what you're talking about is actually even more granular and more specific, which the research appears to support.
Yeah.
Your ability to stick with things when you have something really powerful out there drawing you to make the choices that are helpful. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, interesting. Do you write much in the book about how we measure or define risk and reward, or opportunity and risk? Is there a lot in that area that you talk about in the book?
In previous books, there's not one bit in this.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So, but it does a lot with trade-offs, but not specifically with risk and return and things of that nature.
There's not a lot of like meat and potatoes finance stuff in this book. I mean, it's mostly happiness, contentment, fulfillment, purpose.
Soulful stuff.
Yeah. I felt like I had covered risk. I've talked all about sort of behavioral definitions of risk, and I've done that whole thing in previous books, and it's important. Like, I mean, it's critical. But this book was the softer side of Sears.
Well, it's also, I mean, again, back to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's at the top of the pyramid. You're dealing with sort of the things that make life meaningful and self-actualization and, and joy. And how do you build, how do you manage your wealth to that end, not just to, rate of return and, and volatility. So I kind of get that the theme and the ideas were so different. Well, tell me, is there anything else in the book that you really want to make sure people know about to motivate them to check it out? Because I'm enjoying it. I'm about halfway through it, and I like books just like this for the reasons that you mentioned. Oftentimes I'll get these kind of books and I'll read, I'll read a chapter a day or a chapter a week, just exactly like you mentioned, and try to sort of contemplate on it. I guess my ADD nature it feeds right into that, because I can. And you can jump around. You don't have to start at the beginning and end at the end, and you don't really miss anything. Is there anything else though in the book you'd like to pull out?
Yeah, so I just opened the book. 50 chapters can be hard to keep straight. So I just opened the book, and I'll talk briefly about a couple of chapters, and then I'll tease a couple so people can go
Perfect.
get it. But,
Perfect.
One of the chapters is called "A Good Financial Plan Leaves Room for Growth," and this deals with a very specific bias that I think is really cool, right? So the name of the bias is the end of history illusion. So the end of history illusion is this idea that, I'm 45. I just turned 45. This book came out on my birthday. So I just turned 45. And if I look at the 25-year-old version of myself, right, I go, wow, that guy was an idiot. Like, I I can
what
look.
matters today is quite different than what mattered
Yeah.
to you then, I'm sure.
Yeah, like I can look back at my 20 years ago self and go, wow, like a lot has changed. And that is exactly as it should be. But most people, when they project forward and they say, well, okay, well, what will Daniel, what will 65-year-old Daniel be like? They think, well, he'll be like me today, but just with some more wrinkles. Like, well, no, like
Yeah.
a lot's going to change.
Yeah.
And so, I think a good financial plan needs a level of flexibility to accommodate human growth, right? Like you're
Right.
going to change.
Right.
You're going to want things and value things that you don't know about today. And you can't just always sort of straight line project forward. So I think this is a powerful thing to know about ourselves. The thing I love about the book is that these things should serve us outside of our financial lives. I mean, they have application to finance, but like that's something important to know about you as a person. There's a chapter on women. There's a chapter specifically on the investment strengths of women and how how women are the best investors around. And I give sort of the reasons for that. And that no one, not even women, believes that. When you ask mixed groups that are, 50-50 men and women, only 9% of an equally divided group thinks that women will be the better investors.
Right.
And yet they are in both professional and retail and every context. So, I talk about what we can learn from women and why we need more women in the industry and sort of everywhere from the kitchen table to the boardroom table where women need to be more involved in making financial decisions. But I think that one's a little bit unique too and one that folks will like to check out.
And I guess all of that is, especially on the issue related to women is, because so much of what we do is behavioral. It's not the math, it's the behavioral. And I think sometimes women are a little bit more advanced than some of us guys on some of the deeper things, while we're more accomplishment oriented or comparison oriented. But who knows? That's me just pontificating. I love what you said about the planning, though, about the room for growth or the room for being different. And because I talk all the time, people pay us to help them construct. They don't pay us to help them construct a financial plan. They pay us to help them manage wealth over time and to change the plan, because your goals will change, your philosophies will change, your circumstances will change, and you're not going to be the same person. I know Daniel Gilbert wrote a lot about that kind of stuff in Stumbling on Happiness, I think was the name of the book. And it was kind of eye-opening to me because I do what you do. I forecast when I was younger, I forecast what would be important to me when I'm 61, which is where I am today. And where I am today is so different than what I forecast. The things that matter to me are so different than where I forecast. So that chapter is really helpful, I think, for all of us to recognize not to be so rigid about the plans that we're making. Yeah. Well, Daniel, this has been great. Tell us the easiest way for people to find you if they want to follow your information, and certainly the easiest way for them to get their hands on The Soul of Wealth. And again, I'd highly recommend the book. Again, it is a great book for a broad audience. Again, because it's fun to read. The stories are helpful, and there's some deep psychological messages, but there's tons of just fun stories and history. You'll learn a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeff, for sharing your platform with me. First thing would be go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever and buy The Soul of Wealth. I have a podcast called Standard Deviations, right, which is worth a look. And right, I'm on LinkedIn, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and Daniel Crosby on Twitter.
All the normal places. Well, great, Daniel. Thanks again. Hope you guys enjoyed this. You can see why I like to have Daniel on periodically, because he speaks the language that I think so many people need to hear about meaning and purpose, and how to build financial plans that give you the freedom to go be who you were created to be, which is really what I'm passionate about. So I hope you found it helpful. If you'd like to give me some feedback, you can certainly reach me by email at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com. Please pass the show on to your friends. And if you like the show, give us a rating or some comments at all your normal streaming platforms, and go find what makes your heart come alive and put the plans in place to pursue it. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to help you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments on the show, feel free to reach out to us at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com, or you can find us on the web at www.tandemgrowth.com. Jeff Bernier is the President and Chief Investment Officer at Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. This show is a production of Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC. All information discussed is general in nature, is provided for informational purposes only, and should not be construed as specific financial, legal, or tax advice. Listeners should consult an attorney or tax professional regarding their specific legal or tax situation. Listeners should not rely on the content of this podcast as the basis for any investment decisions. A professional advisor should be consulted and/or independent due diligence should be conducted before implementing anything discussed in this show. While information presented is believed to be factual and up-to-date, Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not make any representations or warranties as to the accuracy, timeliness, suitability, completeness, or relevance of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party, such as guests on the podcast, and takes no responsibility for the same.